Hi everyone! In this video, I'm going to share with you 6 essential techniques to paint skies and clouds in watercolor. So without any further ado, let's get into the painting. So the first technique is the easiest one. I'm going to wet the sky section. I have some blue left in my brush. I'm going to make sure my brush is very clean. I'm using Sander's cold press watercolor block for this painting. Well, basically for all of them. And I'm starting by wetting the top section of the paper. I'm making sure that the paper is thoroughly wet and I don't have any puddles of water anywhere, and I also don't have any dry patches in between. Here you can see the paper has a really nice shine, and that means it's thoroughly wet. And while I'm allowing the paper to absorb the water, I'm getting my color ready. I'm going to be using phthalo blue. This is a cool blue, but you can use any blue that you like. It doesn't have to be this one. And I'm going to start by painting a very simple gradient wash. So I want this color to be darker and more saturated at the top. And as I'm coming down, I want this color to fade away basically and become lighter. I'm using my size 12 Chinese calligraphy brush. You can use any round brush that you have, or even a flat brush. I'm getting more thicker paint and maybe add a tiny bit of indigo to my color because I want it to be darker at the top section of the sky. And I'm keeping in mind that the paper is wet and the paper was already wet and there is some water on my brush too. So that means this color is going to dry much paler. So if I think this is a little bit too dark and too saturated, that means it's going to be perfect once it's completely dry. And now I'm going to use a paper towel and I'm basically going to use this to lift the paint. Going to get a new one because the other one is already dirty. And I'm going to lift some more clouds. And the ones that are farther away from us and they're going down towards the horizon, they're going to be smaller. And you can basically lift this clouds as any shapes that you want. And as you can see, because phthalo blue was a staining color, the paper towel didn't lift it completely, so these cloud shapes, they're not as white as the white of the paper, and that's exactly what I wanted because clouds aren't really perfectly white. They do have some tone to them, but it is up to you. If you want your paintings to look more punchy and more dramatic, you can use a color that is not staining. So once you lift it with a paper towel, you can basically you can see the white of the paper. Cerulean blue is a good option if you like that effect. I'm just going to leave this alone. So the next technique that I'm going to show you, I'm still going to wet my paper first. Some of these colors, they're a little bit harder to really get them out of your brush. And while I'm allowing this water to get absorbed by the paper, I'm going to mix some colors. I think I want to have some French ultramarine blue for this one. So I'm just adding that to phthalo blue. And I also want to mix a purple, a shadow color for the clouds. I'm adding quinacridone magenta to French ultramarine blue to mix that color, but you can use any other reds or pinks that you have available. If you want the shadow color of your clouds to look more natural and not like purple, you can add a touch of complementary of purple, which is yellow or yellow ochre, just a tiny bit, to grade down your purple and make it look more natural. I think I'm going to add a touch of lavender because lavender is just my favorite color. I have to add it to my skies. Just can't resist. Maybe a little bit more of the quinacridone magenta. And I'm going to start by adding blue first, just really loosely. I'm not worried about where I'm painting, but I want to paint a little bit blue on the top, a little bit here, and leave some areas to add the purple. Maybe a little bit lighter at the bottom, so I'm taking the water and hopefully some paint out of my brush like this, and making the bottom part of the sky much lighter. And I'm just going to add a little bit more color, especially make it darker at the top. A little bit phthalo blue over here, just really loosely. And while this is wet, I'm cleaning my brush and I'm kind of taking the excess water a little bit off of it, not completely. I'm not using a napkin to really take the excess water off of it. I'm just lightly, so it doesn't have too much water. And I'm going to try and lift some paint using my brush. I'm going to repeat the same process. I have to clean my brush after every time that I'm trying to lift, so that I don't accidentally muddy my color. Excess water, repeating the same process. I can see a puddle of water over here. I'm using, my brush is very dry right now. I'm using my brush to take the excess water. You can do that with anywhere else that you have these puddles. I think I'm gonna paint some shapes like this. Just keep repeating the same process till you get the intensity that you're looking for. You can leave it really soft and loose like this, or you can just keep doing this till you get a really nice white shape for the cloud. This technique looks looser and more free compared to the other one, because using a paper towel gives you these harder edges, and working this way you have more of a softer edge for these clouds. Okay, so the next technique is called negative painting. Negative painting is when you try to paint around something, and by painting around that thing, you're basically painting that thing. For example, because we don't use white paint in watercolor, and we want to have a cloud over here, instead of trying to paint the cloud, we're going to paint the sky around it, and that way the cloud will show as well. This technique doesn't come naturally for us because our brain doesn't work in that way to want to paint around something. And that's exactly the reason that this technique can be absolutely amazing, because for some reason we create way more interesting shapes using this technique. And if you really want to get better at watercolor and become a master, this is the technique that you're going to need. And painting clouds and sky is the best and the easiest way to practice negative painting. So I really recommend you give it a try, and after practicing a few times, your brain starts to like understand how it works, and you're just going to get used to it. It won't seem confusing for you anymore. So I'm going to start by wetting the top section of the paper. I think I'm going to have another tiny cloud over here if I can. So while your watercolors are wet, you have time to really take a look at your painting, see if you want to change anything, correct any mistakes, lift any more colors. So really take your time. You don't really have to rush it. As long as you're using a good quality paper that stays wet for a good amount of time. Okay. I'm making sure that the paper is thoroughly wet. If you're a complete beginner and you feel like your paper always dries really fast and you never get the time to do anything and practice this wet on wet technique, spend a longer amount of time to wet your paper. If you're not using a watercolor block, you can hold your paper underneath running water and just let it be there for like 5 to 10 minutes, and that way your paper stays wet for a really long time. But if you're using a block like this one, just spend a longer amount of time wetting your paper. Just let it absorb the water, give it a minute, and again after 1 or 2 minutes, start wetting it all over again. And that way it's going to stay wet for longer. Okay, so for this negative painting technique, I'm going to be using phthalo blue. Actually, I think I'm going to change it up and use some cerulean blue. This is cerulean blue chromium. It's slightly darker and more saturated and slightly more opaque than traditional cerulean blue, but it's just one of my favorite blues that I always use in my skies. Okay, so I'm starting by, this has too much water. You can see when your brush has too much water in it, you can see how the paint spreads. We don't want that. We want to have more control on our paints. So 2 ways we can try to fix this. The first way is to give our paper more time to slightly absorb the water and start like become slightly less wet. And the next method is to just take the excess water off your brush and try it again. I'm going to do it again. And I'm basically going to very loosely dab my brush on the wet paper and just paint this blue. And this shape that is left over unpainted here is going to be a cloud. As always, I want it to be slightly darker at the top. And get slightly paler as it goes towards the horizon. It doesn't have to be the exact shape of the shape that I'm painting. If you're painting along, just as long as you're painting some random shapes, because clouds, they can be any shape. If you study clouds and shape of them and the way they are, they can be any shape, so they don't have to be exactly like this one. And I think I have a lot of water over here, so I'm taking the excess water off my brush, taking more paint, and just for the rest of it, I'm going to make some horizontal lines because the clouds are really far away from us and they become kind of looking like this. And while this is wet, I'm going to have some of this purple, the shadow color. So I'm gonna have a little bit more of the lavender to it and a touch more quinacridone magenta, a little bit more lavender. And I'm going to do the same thing, but this time I'm painting the shadow parts of the clouds. The paper is still very wet, and these colors are going to have a very nice soft edge. As I'm coming down, I'm changing my brush strokes from dabbing to more of a horizontal. You can switch to a smaller brush too if you want, especially for this small paper. I'm very used to this brush, so I'm just gonna keep using this one, but feel free to use a smaller brush if you feel more comfortable. I'm just gonna blend them out for the ones that are very far away from us. This helps us to create a better sense of depth and distance. I just love to watch these colors blend together. I cannot believe how satisfying watercolor is. Like, it's unbelievable. I have tried all the other mediums like oils, pastels. I really like oils and pastels too, but just watercolor is like magical. It's unbelievable. I feel like I'm addicted to it. Okay, I just added a touch of indigo to this purple shadow color that I had. I'm going to have slightly darker color for this shadow part of the clouds. Just a little bit here and there, a few touches. I don't want it to cover the whole thing. Just a little bit would be sufficient. So it's not just one color. It looks more interesting when it's more than one color. You can see how much more complicated this one looks compared to the other one. That's why I really recommend you practice this negative painting with sky. Just try to create like 10-15 different shapes for clouds. Like it can be really fun. Okay. If you want to add more drama to your paintings, a really good way, as I'm talking about painting skies and clouds, a really good way to add drama is to darken the shadow color for the clouds. So if you want it to look really dramatic, just add more indigo to a few spots. Don't put it all over the shadow color, just in a few spots, make it darker. Can have a really nice effect. Okay, so for these first 3 paintings, we learned how to paint a gradient wash for a simple sky, and then use a paper towel to lift some hopefully interesting shapes for the clouds. For the second one, we just wetted the surface and we randomly added some blue and purple, and then before we let it dry, we clean our brush and we try to lift some shapes for the clouds using our brush. And for the third one, we just very loosely painted some blue and basically painted the shape around these clouds, so that when we leave this white surface unpainted, it can read as clouds. And we also painted some shadow color for the clouds while the paper was wet. I'm going to remove the tape. It's always so satisfying to watch and hear to listen to the sound of this tape coming off. And I'm going to use a palette knife to remove my block. And we're going to paint 3 more watercolor clouds with 3 completely different techniques. Okay, so before I move on to the next 3 different techniques to paint clouds and sky in watercolor, I just wanted to show you an example of a sky study that I did using negative painting technique. So this one, but this is a very simple, there's just one main cloud shape that I just simply painted some sky, and I left the bottom edge kind of raggedy and uneven like this, that can look like clouds. And I also used a paper towel and I lifted some color over here, and those are you can see these harder edges over here. So I basically combined this technique and this one. So feel free to get creative and combine any of these techniques, and just practice a lot and come up with really new and interesting shapes for the clouds and the sky. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next technique. I'm going to be painting a morning sky. The color that I'm going to be using is a mixture of pink. I'm using opera pink and orange, using Aussie red gold. And morning sky is going to be very similar, not exactly like sunset, but the colors are more softer and muted down compared to a sunset sky. So I'm basically using similar colors that I would use for a sunset sky. I'm going to test my color on a piece of paper. And I'm also going to have some quinacridone magenta. I'm going to use it as like a really watered down pink for the sunrise. And for the blue of the sky, I'm going to use phthalo blue. And also I'm going to use a touch of lavender to have a nice variation of for these all different colors. I'm going to start by wetting the whole surface of the paper. I don't want to have any harsh lines at the bottom, at the horizon here. So that's why I'm wetting the whole paper. Making sure there are no dry patches in between. Okay, I'm going to start by painting my purest color first, so that I don't have to risk this color get muddy. But I think I'm going to allow the paper to absorb the water a little bit, because the water is sat on top of the paper now. But after like 10 to 15 seconds, it's going to really get absorbed by the paper, and the colors, we would have better control when we apply them on this wet paper. I'm going to paint this color in a angled shape. I'm going to add a little bit more of pink, and I'm going to clean my brush and add some of this magenta. Maybe bring it up like this. And now I'm going to move on to lavender. I'm noticing that there is a lot of water over here, so I'm using a more of a drier brush to take the excess water. And now I'm just going to move on to painting the blue. And I'm going to vary the tonal value by leaving some lighter color in between. Taking the excess water off my brush here, and bring some of that blue at the bottom here too. very light touch. If I put too much pressure, that can kind of lift the paint underneath, but I'm trying to keep my brush strokes really light. And maybe I'm going to add a little bit of darker color at the top. And I think I'm going to apply some of that pink salmon color that we mixed at the bottom here too. I'm going to mix a little bit more of it. And I'm going to allow this to dry completely. So for the next painting, so far we've been painting the sky wet on wet, using wet on wet technique. Watercolor is a magical medium. It's perfect for painting skies because we can do wet on wet and have really effortless soft edges that can look really dreamy and nice. But I also wanted to show you some variations for if you want to, for example, experiment with painting wet on dry. To paint wet on dry, I'm going to use my flat brush because it's more important to have defined shapes when you're painting wet on dry because there's no water to blend everything. So all the shapes that you're painting are more defined and obvious. And using a black flat brush can really help you to create more abstract shapes. By abstract shape, I mean a more interesting shape. So that's the reason I'm using this brush, but you can use a round brush if you want and just experiment and see which one you like better. This is a Princeton Neptune 1/2 inch brush. And I'm simply going to be using the same phthalo blue color, making sure that I like this color because I'm not putting any water on the paper first. So this color, when it dries, it doesn't get light as much as the ones that are painted on a wet paper. So because this is there isn't too much water going on here, this is basically going to stay about the same. It's a sky, so we don't want it to be too dark. The tonal value of the sky is not really dark. And I'm just simply making sure that I have good amount of water here, because if this is too dry, once I start painting the shape of the blue of the sky, by the time that I'm starting to finish painting that area, it starts to dry and it's going to leave me some dry areas of the paint. So I need to make sure that I have good amount of water on my brush, and I'm just simply starting to paint the blue of the sky using this brush. And while the paint is wet, I can take my time and look at it, see if I want to change anything. Make it darker. I think I'm going to add a little bit more color. And I'm also going to mix a kind of a shadow color for the clouds. This is some of the phthalo blue. I'm going to add some lavender and some quinacridone magenta. Testing my color over here. I think this is a little bit too dark. I'm going to add some more lavender. maybe a touch more magenta, and a little bit more water to lighten the tonal value. To use this one. I think it needs to be slightly lighter. Okay, that's better. And I'm going to be using a smaller bowl to clean my brush because it's easier to clean your flat brushes to dab it on the surface. I'll show you how I clean it, because we usually clean round brushes like this. It's easier to clean them like this, but for flat brushes they're harder to clean, so you always have some leftover paint left in them. So that's the best way to clean them. And I'm just simply going to paint some marks for the shadow part of the clouds. And then I'm going to clean my brush here, taking the excess water off it, and I'm just trying to soften some of these shadow colors. This gives you a completely different effect with watercolor. You can add more purple if you want, but I'm just going to keep it very light. And I'm going to add some of the same color, maybe add a little bit of purple to it, and just basically painting it towards the horizon. The paper is dry. Also going to soften the bottom edge, and over here maybe add a little bit more of the purple shadow color here. Again, softening some of these edges. I'm starting to have some backgrounds here. Maybe some horizontal brush strokes here. And I'm just going to allow this to dry. I just want to show you how I like to clean my flat brushes. You really need to like get into it like this, because if you just try to rinse it on a bigger bowl or water container, it's really hard to rinse it clean. Okay, so for the next painting, I'm going to use a tape to make sure that I have a nice straight line for the horizon, and make sure that you use your best quality tape, because if you use one of these ones that are, these are really good too. It really depends on the paper you use into, but sometimes I have experience with them seeping underneath the tape, like the color can seep underneath the tape. So that's why I like to use these really powerful ones. And once I have to remove them, I really am careful and try to like make sure that I'm not tearing the paper. If you try to like tear it in this way, like in an angled way, not like this, but this way, there's a really less chance of it ripping your paper. And you can also use a hair dryer to kind of deactivate the tape, make it looser. Okay, making sure this is really in place. And I'm going to start by mixing the same salmon color, but this time a little bit more towards orange. So there's more orange in the mixture. I'm going to test the color. I think I want it more towards orange. And I also want to have some phthalo blue for the sky. Maybe a little bit more of cobalt blue to make it darker. The tonal value of cobalt blue is darker than phthalo blue. And I also want a very nice, super rich, dark indigo. So I'm going to just use it in my palette. I'm not even gonna bring it here, just the whole pan. That is, let me see if I can show you. So I'm going to try and use it like this so I get the maximum strength. And I'm also going to use some paper towel to lift the sun. So I'm having this handy, it's a smaller, I'm just going to make sure it's the same size that I want. I'm just going to like make it into a point. So once the paint is still wet, I can lift the sun using this paper towel. Okay, so I'm going to start by wetting the whole paper, the top section of the paper. If you have too much water on your paper, like I do here, I'm just using a brush that I dabbed the excess water off of it, and I'm just trying to take that excess water off the paper. Really cleaning my brush very good, making sure there's no blue paint left in it. And I'm starting by applying this orange color. I'm going to add some yellow to it too. I just want it to be look more natural. And I'm just simply going to add this color. So this is the color that I wanted to look once the painting is dry. And I know that this is going to dry much paler, so I'm just adding more paint to get a better strength. Just keeping it really at the bottom part of the sky. And now I'm going to move on to phthalo blue. Very simply covering the top section of the paper, taking the excess water so it doesn't have too much water here and runs down on the orange. Here you can see how dry my brush is, so I don't want to have too much water come down here. And maybe taking a little bit more paint and make it a little bit darker so that it doesn't dry too pale. Watercolor paintings are very famous being really pale and washed out, so we want to have good amount of paint and pigment so that it looks more colorful and beautiful. I'm cleaning my brush, taking the excess water, and I'm trying to blend this blue with this orange. I'm not trying to massage the blue into orange too much, just a little bit so that it looks blended. And now it's time to paint the shadow color for the clouds. So like I showed you, I'm using indigo, very thick paint with very little water on my brush so that I have a good control and this basically sits on the paper, even though the paper is still very wet. But as long as your paint is thick and you don't have too much water on your brush, it's going to sit where you put it. It's not going to spread too much all over the page. Just making some loose shapes for these clouds. It's really fun to experiment and paint these clouds with different brushes too. You get completely different results if you use, for example, a flat brush to paint at this stage. I added some magenta to phthalo blue to have some variation of different colors here. I'm thinking about adding another cloud here, but I think I'm going to leave it at this stage. I think it looks better if it's more simplified than too busy. And that just comes with experience. Like if you don't know these things and you feel really confused, that's just because maybe you're a beginner and you haven't painted a lot of paintings. So the more paintings that you paint, the more you learn from it. That's why I always tell to my students that be excited about ruining a painting, because when you ruin a painting, you learn so much from it that can really improve your watercolor skills. But when the painting goes well, that's really good too, because you know that what you did was right and you got a good result out of it. But when it goes wrong, because we humans, we kind of remember negative things more than good things. So when it goes wrong, you kind of remember what you did that it didn't have a good result. So I'm going to see if I can lift the sun here, but I think it's already dried. Yeah, it's dried. That's okay. I'm going to show you how to fix it. I think I used the color that is like impossible to lift too. I don't think I can lift that color once it's dry. But we can always use a opaque medium like white gouache that is very, very useful in watercolor. And we can paint the sun on top of the orange using white gouache. Okay, so now the painting, all of them are finished. So we started by, I'm going to remove this. So we started by painting a very simple gradient wash of the blue sky, and then we used a paper towel to lift some paint for the clouds. For the second one, we wetted the whole surface. We added some purple and blue color, and we used our brush to lift the paint. For this one, we used negative painting technique and did that wet on wet. And for the last three paintings, for the first one, we used diagonal brush strokes to kind of show movement of the clouds in the sunrise sky. For this one, we used negative painting but wet on dry. And we also painted some shadow color for the clouds, and we used a clean damp brush to soften the edges for some of these shadow colors. And for the last one, we painted wet on wet some really dark dramatic clouds for a sunset scene. And also you can always, like I said, combine these techniques. For example, you can paint, you can lift using a paper towel like we did here, but then you can wet the cloud and add some shadows wet on wet if you want. Over here you can do the same thing that we did, lift the clouds with your brush, and also use a tiny touch of paper towel to lift some more clouds with different shapes, so that you have variety in your edges. Some of them are really soft like this, and some of them are harder, like the other example that I showed you here. I painted this and I used a tiny bit of paper towel in some spots so that I have a variation in different edges. This is more suitable for you once you get more advanced and you really master these basic techniques. Over here that we painted negative painting wet on dry, you can always use a clean damp brush and basically just soften the edges of the blue color so that you have somewhat of a softer edge. And yeah, just feel free to combine any of these techniques and just creative as much as you can and have fun while you're doing that. I really hope you enjoyed watching this basic watercolor techniques to paint skies and clouds. I also want to create another video and share with you my signature technique that I like to paint my skies in a very loose style. So let me know if you would like to see something like that. And yeah, just don't forget to ask me any questions in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy painting!